Alright, today we are going to talk about Hebrews and Phoenicians, two of the more well-known groups to establish themselves in the Fertile Crescent. First, we're going to talk about the Hebrews. Here is where the Hebrews settled. Here's obviously the Fertile Crescent, this area. Here's the Mediterranean Sea. Here's the Jordan River. And this is the approximate area of where the Hebrews set up their civilization. Today, it is known as Israel, which is kind of a hot spot in the world, which you'll learn a little bit more about when you take, or if you take, World History 2. But you can see it here on the close-up, and then the larger world map, just a tiny piece of land for Jewish people to call home today. Hebrews were the first monotheists. And monotheism means belief in only one God. Make sure you know the difference between monotheism and polytheism, please. Alright, first we got Abraham. Abraham was the founder of Judaism. He forms a covenant, which is a kind of an agreement or a promise with God. And this introduced the idea of a promised land. If you get your people to go to the promised land, they'll be saved, they'll have a good place to live, they'll live in peace, etc. He was also a prophet, which means he is a messenger, in this case, from God. Messenger from God. Then we have Moses. You may have heard the expression, let my people go. Moses is given credit for saying that when he tried to free the Hebrews, who were slaves at the time, from the Egyptians. He did lead the Hebrews, who again were all Jews who were slaves at the time, out of Egypt. And we're going to watch a clip on that from the movie Exodus, Gods and Kings, which is pretty decent. At least that part of the movie is. Moses was also a messenger from God, and he warned the Egyptians, if you don't release my people, there's going to be 10 plagues, and things will get ugly. And according to biblical history, that's what happened, until finally the Egyptians had had enough and they released the Jews, or the Hebrews, and Moses led them on an exodus, E-X-O-D-U-S, which means escape or exit out of Egypt. Here are the 10 plagues real quick. You won't have to know these, but this just gives you an idea. And you will see them in the video, and how it affected, based on the movie, how it affected the Egyptian people and the king at the time, Ramses, which was Moses' half-brother, or adopted brother. Here is the Exodus, roughly. Here's Egypt, the Nile River Delta, great soil here. Crossing the Red Sea, that's when they part the Red Sea, down through the Sinai Peninsula, sticking close to the water's edge, and then up through Canaan, and then up to the Promised Land. Okay. Famous Bob Marley song, Exodus. Another word you want to be familiar with is diaspora. Diaspora is the forced scattering of people, and generally you're forced to leave because of war, starvation, or famine. Something is forcing you to leave, and people kind of scatter in different directions. Another word you want to be familiar with is exile. So the Jews were also exiled, meaning they were banned or expelled from your country. And sometimes, so exodus, exile, diaspora, make sure you know what those words mean. They are very similar, and I guess kind of have some overlap in their meaning. The 10 Commandments were the Hebrew laws, and they were the moral code to guide people's behavior. If you look at the first 5 here, first 4, those kind of deal with religion, and then 5 through 10 deal with personal, behavior, acting like, being a nice person, treating others as you wish to be treated, etc. The holy book of the Hebrews was the Torah, Torah, and this was a type of sacred book text, which means sacred book or sacred text, textbook, if you will. Christians later would call it the Old Testament. So if you have a Bible in your house that contains the Old and New Testaments, you have the Old Testament is the Torah. A lot of people don't realize that. Down here, this is the Star of David, which is the symbol of the Jewish faith, and you may have seen it if you recall talking about World War II. Jews in Germany had to wear the Star of David to identify themselves to the Nazis. This is Jerusalem, the holy city of the Jewish people. And it is kind of a city that has special meaning excuse me, to Christians as well. In Jerusalem, there's something called the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. And what people do, it's a very popular site for Jews or Hebrews to go there to send prayers up to God. Generally what happens is people write prayers on pieces of paper, then fold them up or roll them up and put them in the cracks of the wall in hopes that God answers their prayers or reads them, etc. As for Jewish problems, they were conquered many times. They were forced to move many times with diaspora, and then they also had to deal with enslavement. So conquered many times, diaspora, and enslavement. So for part 2, the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians lived on the east coast of the Mediterranean, very close to the Hebrews at one point in time. Here's Jerusalem, here's Israel, or as it is today. Okay. The Phoenicians were known as carriers of civilization, which basically means they spread ideas across the Mediterranean as they explored. The Phoenicians were very good at sailing, seafaring trade, and so when they did that, obviously they got ideas from other people that they met along the Mediterranean, and they also gave ideas to those people. They also had colonies. All these red lines are trade routes that they established along the Mediterranean, and they would also set up colonies. I don't know if you can go back here. No, you can't see it. Sorry. And they established colonies to make themselves richer, more powerful, and get access to resources that they didn't normally have. One of the things that they traded in heavily was purple dye, because purple could be used to dye clothing, garments, etc., textiles. And the purple dye actually came from secreted resin, if you will, from sea snails. They let it dry, and then they add water to it or moisture to it to create that dye that they use for fabric. They also traded in cedar trees. If you've never smelt a cedar tree, it has a very nice fragrance, pleasant smell, and it was lighter in weight, which made it ideal for building and transporting and things like that. The biggest thing is they also had the alphabet. Our alphabet the Phoenician alphabet is much more similar to our alphabet than let's say, the Sumerian alphabet with cuneiform. Obviously, it doesn't look a whole lot like ours, matching up in terms of letters. If you look at the N here, the M, the W, the Z, etc. But just the idea that it's a lot more simpler than, let's say, cuneiform was or hieroglyphics was at the time. And the Phoenicians also had a large sea trade network. So they were traders on the Mediterranean Sea, very busy, very much in the trading business along the Mediterranean coast. Alright, so that's it. That's a wrap for this part of the notes. Again, if you have any questions, write them down. Key points. Alright, Hebrews are the first monotheists. Trade in the spread of ideas, especially with the Phoenicians. And then that vocab, make sure you know the meanings of these different words. Exodus, diaspora, covenant, prophet, and exile. And don't forget to do your summary. So I will see you guys next class.